Thank you for coming down. I just have a few questions to ask you. Well, Brady, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Wayne.
Yeah, I'm glad we could make this work. You know, we kind of connected through Instagram, and looks like you've been doing some pretty cool things. So I just wanted to sit down and have a conversation with you.
Yes, sir. Absolutely trying to get the message out there, and was lucky enough to run across you to give me some guidance on how to do that. So,
Well, I'm glad I could help where I could. That's what this is all about. In fact, I know, and we're going to talk more about it, but you're segueing into the podcasting world. And that's one of the things I really like about podcasting is kind of that family helping each other out feel that this has.
mm-hmm. Yeah. And I had, no ideas what to expect. So a lot of the information you did give me, it was very helpful and very great. So I have you and I have my buddy Harrison here at his studio helping me out, which blessings from all sides. So, it was kind of coming into the unknown, but it's working out good so far.
It's awesome. I'm glad to hear that. Well, let's start. I like to just ask some get to know you questions. I kind of ask them of everybody. So we'll start there and then we'll segue into our conversation.
Sure.
So let me ask you, Brady, is it coffee or tea?
Coffee. 100%.
Good answer. Any particular favorite type?
Well, what I'm about to say is probably going to sound like sacrilege, but I mostly drink from a Keurig. I know it's not, coffee lovers' biggest thing, but it's easy. It's simple.
Exactly. And, in the world we're in right now, simple works, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Just pop up in the morning, get it going.
Exactly. Honestly, I use a Keurig most of the time anyway. I have a few other ways I like to brew it, but the Keurig works.
I'm glad I'm not the only one.
Yeah, you're in good company. You got a favorite place to have that cup of coffee?
Well, ideally it would be, on the back patio overviewing a mountainscape in Montana, but I'm in Nebraska, so that's not really a choice. Maybe not my favorite place, but my most common place is right in the morning, sitting at the dining room table doing my homework. That's where I end up having my first coffee, and it's where I get my most productive work done is in the morning.
Yeah. Well, see, that's something. And that's why I always love asking that question, because it seems like there's a moment when we all like to have that cup of coffee, and it's just when we're in that space. And I'm with you on that beautiful vista in Montana. You're a lot closer geographically than I am, though. So
true.
Do you have a best or worst travel story or experience?
Oh, well, I've got, I guess, a couple not so great ones, deployments. I guess how you look at it, good or bad. But I don't think I've had anything too extreme either way. I've had some good vacations. I've had some bad ones. Dealing with the airlines is always a hassle, as everybody knows, but I've never had anything too rough,
Yeah. No, it happens with everybody. I think I had a 16-hour trip that should have taken 2 hours once between here and Kentucky. And yeah, it was a long day. And, everybody has those stories or those experiences.
And those are always the worst. I mean, when you're, for instance, I guess I do have a worse one. Heading, I have 3 days of leave and I'm coming home to see some family real quick. And then, I have a early AM flight turns into a midnight flight. So now I only have 24 hours with my family instead of, 2 days.
Yeah. Though, in the end, it probably worked out. You probably had a great time with your family.
Yeah, I did. Absolutely. You always do.
Yeah. So it's, it's kind of one of those things that even for all the frustration, at least, sometimes the journey's half the battle.
100%.
Let me ask you, you got a place that brings you peace, like a favorite spot where you just kind of stop and breathe and enjoy life?
I wouldn't say necessarily one place, but anytime that I can get out into the woods with myself and my dog and just go on a hike, I like to let him off leash. So I try and find some really secluded places away from everybody and just go for a long walk, 2-3 miles out in the wilderness.
Very cool. Not just hiking, or do you get into hunting or anything in the fall, or what's your passion?
I have been a lifelong hunter. Since I've moved to Nebraska, it's fallen off quite a bit. Just
Isn't that where all the monster bucks are there, Brady?
Yeah, I will. I'm from Texas myself, so some of the biggest deer I've ever seen in my life. I didn't know white-tailed deer got that big, and they're walking around your neighborhood here.
Yeah. I was gonna say,
But I
being
do.
from Florida, they're like the size of puppies down here, just to be clear.
Oh, yeah, I would imagine. Yeah, probably about the same as Texas, I would imagine. But yeah, I do a lot of bird hunting. I try and get out and go on a couple pheasant hunts every year. If time permits, I like to get out and do a little dove hunting as well.
Oh, very cool. Now, what is dove and pheasant? Is that in the fall up there, or when do you
Yeah,
get out?
yeah. Fall, pheasant, wintertime,
Very cool.
fall and winter.
Any favorite hunting stories?
Mm, well, anytime I can go out with my dad, he comes and visits, again from Texas, once a year at least, and we'll do a pheasant hunt. So every year is my favorite hunting story with him.
It's
So
awesome.
it's always a hoot going out with him. But yeah, what about you? You were about to talk about hunting, I guess.
Yeah, same thing for me. I like to get out. I honestly didn't do a lot of hunting growing up. I'm from Indiana myself, though. The other place there's large bucks, but not quite the size of Nebraska's running around.
Hmm.
And so I did a little bit, but as I'm getting older, I actually try to take a trip up every fall and get more into it.
Yeah, good.
So
And that's traveling to hunt it's pricey, but sometimes it's worth it.
absolutely is. Well, like you said, I think that my favorite part of it really has little to do with hunting. In fact, half the
Mhm.
time it's armed hiking for me. But you go out there and you just get to sit there and enjoy the moment. You know, you get out before the sun comes up, or you're out right when the sun's going down, and you just get to be you in the tranquil woods, and it's hard to beat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will expand on that. I think for me growing up, half the fun from hunting wasn't hunting. It was after the day was over, sitting around the campfire with all your friends and family, cooking out and telling some pretty outlandish stories.
Yes, that's the best part. I think that's what people fail to mention. Fail the non-hunters out there. The people are like, why do you want to go do that? It's like, well, you don't understand the camaraderie part of it.
Oh yeah, it's huge. It's a big part
So
of it.
so let's segue a little bit into your story. Just tell us a little bit about you, Brady. What's your journey like?
Sure. Um, well, I obviously I said I was raised in Texas, from Fort Worth. Wasn't always always. I was never the greatest student in high school. Graduating high school, I really had no plans. I knew college wasn't for me. I was kind of sick of school, so I just decided to take the plunge and join the military with no really rhyme or reason, I guess. I joined the Air Force because I heard, everybody says, oh, the Air Force, it's easy. So I was like, okay, I'll take the easy path and join the Air Force. But the Air Force brought me to Omaha, which is where I currently am. Did a 6-year enlistment, security forces. So it's MP, if you're unfamiliar, MP and other branches, military police. Ended up getting out in 2018. I stuck around Nebraska. A lot of people ask me this: why'd you stick around and you could go back to Texas? Because, I mean, I'm sure anybody who's from Texas will tell you that their Texas pride runs deep.
Oh yes, you hear
But
it quite a bit.
yeah, absolutely. But I met my fiance out here, so I'm sticking around for now. Um, but I got out. I have been using my GI Bill for the last 2 years. It's been a blessing to, have free school. I wasn't ready for school when I got out of high school. I wasn't an attentive student, and I just didn't really have any aspirations. And I think the military drastically changed my outlook on life, positively and negatively, mostly positively. But I got out and I was ready for school, so that's what I've been doing since then, and doing a little contract work on the side with the Marshal Service, and started this Books Behind the Badge project about 8 or 9 months ago, and it's been going really good so far.
Very cool. And obviously, we're going to get deeper into that conversation in just a moment.
Absolutely.
What your time in growing up in Texas, what was that like in Fort Worth? Because here's the thing with Texas, because I've always loved the state of Texas, or at least the stories of the state of Texas. And so the question is there's always kind of like this belief of what Texas is like. What's it really like?
People think that hey, does everybody ride a horse in Texas, or is there, tumbleweeds coming across the road, or are you in a desert? And it's like, well, not really. Texas is it's a pretty big state, so I mean, you kind of get it. You kind of get a little bit of everything. Sure, you can go to a town and hell, maybe half the town's riding a horse, but
Right.
Fort Worth is a very large city. And I always say, when people ask why haven't you moved back to Texas, a lot of the time it's because of traffic. I come out in Omaha and there's no traffic ever. I go back and it's just what should be 20 minutes takes 2 hours. But I did I am a diehard Texan. I have to admit I have a Texas tattoo. It's cliche, but I have one. But I love Texas. I love Texas as a state. I love the people. The camaraderie, like we were talking about a second ago. There's Texas pride, and it's a real thing. So
That's awesome. Well, I like to ask because the same thing in Florida. The problem is Texas has the same problem Florida has, where people are just pouring in from other states. A lot of Californians are pouring into Texas, where here in Florida, a lot of people from New York are pouring in. So, like you said, it can take you an hour to go what should take you 10 minutes down the street. So,
yeah.
yeah, it can be a little bit frustrating. And I'll tell you, we drove through Nebraska probably about a month and a half ago when I was headed out to Wyoming. And I actually enjoyed the state. Now, a lot of people are like, it's boring. You're going to see cornfields. But being from northern Indiana, I kind of felt like I was at home with cornfields and soybean as far as the eye could see.
Yeah, it makes sense. When I got my orders to Nebraska coming out of basic training and tech school, I mean, hell, I'd never been to the Midwest. Maybe Kansas City once, but I didn't know what to expect. I got here and I kind of fell into that wagon where it was like the first year or two, I was like, oh man, this place sucks. There's nothing to do. But the longer you live in Omaha, the more stuff you're going to find to do. And pre-COVID, there's always something to do out here, really. So,
Yeah. And that's so true with all these little towns and all through the Midwest. And they're usually really solid people there too. It's actually usually a really cool place to live and to raise a family.
oh, 100%. Everybody out here is super nice. It's nobody's mean. It's not like going to New Hampshire or something and people are kind of cold and standoffish. It's really welcoming.
Yeah. I I would agree with you on the limited experience I've had out there as well. Let me ask you, so you started this and you mentioned it briefly, Books Behind the Badge. Tell us a little bit about what that is and we'll go from there.
So, and excuse me if I get a little long-winded in this, but it kind of started off with, I've read my whole life. Sometimes more often, sometimes less often. Um, but I started posting my personal reads that I was getting involved in on my personal Instagram account, and people were reaching out to me, just friends. A surprising number actually were saying, "Hey, man, I read this book that you posted about, and I loved it." And so it kind of like sparked this idea, and I had a conversation with a buddy of mine, and we decided that we were going to start a book club, and that book club was called Be Better Book Club. Super simple. We got total of 6 of us in the book club. It's still running strong. And basically every month, one of us picks a book. We each read it. And the reason we do this is it's for accountability. And we kind of learn that if we can hold each other accountable to even just read, 10 pages a day, 15 pages a day, that positivity that you're going to gain and that knowledge you're going to gain from reading, it's going to kind of leak over into every other area of your life. And that's what it did. Even before I started the book club, I have noticed to myself that if I'm reading, a little bit every day, my entire outlook on everything I do it's way better. It's skyrocketed. I'm taking, initiative in other areas of my life instead of just that. And on the opposite spectrum of that, if I don't read even for like a month or two, I feel like crap. I start slipping back into bad habits, and we can maybe touch on that here in a minute with how the military and my negative outlook kind of led me to this. But we ended up creating that book club, and that lasted for a couple months until I actually created an Instagram page for the book club because people were reaching out and telling me they were reading my books from my personal page. So I figured, hey, if we're getting something out of this and we're all we're all enjoying it and we're all learning and we're all growing and expanding. Other people are going to benefit from this as well.
Yeah.
So I created the book page, it was initially the Be Better Book Club page. Had that for, I don't know, a few months, 3, 4, 5, probably 5 months, I bet. And then I just had this idea to rebrand it to the Books Behind the Badge. I just had this idea of, hey, I want to like hone in on my niche and help and really, tailor it towards people to grow my audience, to get that message out farther.
Yeah.
Which worked. I reached out to my book club friends. They were all super supportive of it, so that was great. I rebranded it, and it's grown. It's been great, and it's taken off. I mean, and the reason I keep going is because people keep reaching out, specifically first responders. I get messages, probably get a message every single day saying, "Hey, I like what you're doing. Keep it up," and that's kind of what keeps me going. And we can talk about that here a little bit more. So if you got any questions, just let me know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that feedback that you get from people that are listening or reading and looking at what you're doing, that's awesome. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
even doing this, having people reach out to me and so forth, it's kind of neat because it just, like you said, it inspires you to keep moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm assuming we're talking primarily nonfiction books. Is that, or when you got started, were you throwing some fiction ones in there as well, or how did that look?
So I've always read a little bit of both. The last couple years. So when I really started reading heavy again, I guess I would say is probably 2017 on my last deployment. I mean, obviously when you're deployed, there's not a whole lot else to do. So I read a ton. I got back. I kind of fell off a little bit, but I picked back up pretty quick. I like to read a little bit of everything. I would say probably 80% nonfiction and then 20% fiction. I feel that if you don't ever read fiction, sometimes it can get a little bit dull. So I think switching it up and mixing it up is beneficial for your sanity, really.
Yeah, I would agree with you, and it can be a good escape. And some people, and I rag on it a lot, but they'll get, it's Netflix or whatever for an escape, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I find a good fiction book can do that as well.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I'm not gonna dog on Netflix either because I definitely watch my fair share of Netflix. It's kind of evening time, sit down with the fiance and turn on a show. It's kind of our thing.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's just kind of the thing to do, I think, in 2020 for sure.
Oh, 100%.
So, any favorites in the fiction category, or favorite series, or anything that you were reading?
For fiction, well, right now I'm reading this. Well, let's see. I'm reading The Stand right now, which funny enough, I started reading. I've never read a Stephen King book. I promised one of my book club members that I would read one in October, but given COVID, I figured, hey, what better time than now to start The Stand? For anybody listening that doesn't know, it's basically a virus that wiped out the entire planet, and it's the survivors doing what they do and surviving. So
Yes.
I figured it was a good time, better now than any time to start that. And it's been good so far. I really enjoy it.
I was gonna say, so this is your first Stephen King novel, so you are enjoying it?
Yeah, I love it. I have read one other Stephen King book, but that was on writing. It's a nonfiction book, so it's my first nonfiction Stephen King novel.
Very cool. Very cool. So what kind of categories do you get into on the nonfiction side? Like what, anything in particular, or do you kind of just pull from different types of categories?
Yeah, I like to read. I do read a lot. I do read a lot of self-help, self-development type books. I kind of fall into that. I pick and choose very carefully what I'm reading though, because a lot of the times you pick up, any old self-help book and it's going to be all the same, run of the mill. Hey, do this and this is going to happen in your life. And,
Yeah.
that's not always the case. So I
Take
kind of,
these 5 easy steps and do a morning routine, and you're going to be a different person.
yeah, exactly. And yeah, I mean, I'm sure as well as anybody that's not really the case, but
Yeah.
there's some good ones out there. The last probably year or so, I've gotten really into Stoicism. I read Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, and as far as I don't want to go as far as saying it's my favorite book because as somebody who reads 2 to 4 books a month, it's very hard for me to narrow in on what is Good. And that's subjective for everybody, because I could recommend you a book right now that I thought changed my life, and it might just be something you'd want to throw in the garbage, you know.
Right.
But
Yeah, you start reading that and you're like, what is it that they saw in this book? I'm not getting it.
yeah, absolutely. But I think Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, I think you can really resonate that with anybody, because I think any self-help book that you read now you will find stoicism in some way, shape, or form in that book. So it kind of lays the foundations for that philosophy, in a lot of current authors. Um, they take note of that, and they have those elements in their books. So you're going to find that pretty much everywhere right now.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I think I've seen it as well, just in my anecdotal experience. In fact, it was earlier last year that I first even really heard of it. I had heard of it before, obviously, in school and so forth. But as far as actually taking the book and reading it, it was Otis McGregor who had come on my show, and he was talking about meditations. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
great read. And it's definitely something that I think people should read if they have the opportunity. I also noticed on your site that it looks like sometimes you pull from other, maybe the financial genre. Like I think I saw Robert Kiyosaki and
Mm-hmm.
some other books along those lines. How do you decide what genre or what book to read at that time that the group's going to come together on?
Yeah. So for what I'm reading personally, I try and read at least one nonfiction, and I've, the last few months switched it up. So I'm reading at least one nonfiction and at least one fiction book at the same time. On top of that, I will read the book club of the month. So every month, our member, whoever's up to bat, they get to choose whatever they want to choose. We have some rules and stipulations. It's quite lengthy. I won't, dive into that too much, but in the scope of the rules, they choose a book, and it's beneficial. It's beneficial for all of us, because a lot of people can get stuck in that idea of, I only want to read about this topic. I only want to read about this, and they'll read about that all year long, or they'll read into one genre. So if you have somebody else holding you accountable to read something else, you're going to learn stuff outside of the spectrum that you want to learn. So it is great. A lot of the financial books I probably would have never read myself if it wasn't for other book club members recommending those for me. And it's great, because going into trying to expand my page and trying to understand business and economics and how people think, it's super beneficial for setting up a podcast. I'm sure you would know that
Yeah,
as well.
I would absolutely agree. And Robert Kiyosaki being one of them. I mean, years ago, aging myself here, because I think I'm a little older than you are, Brady. But years ago, I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And yeah, great book, and one that I credit would be one of a couple books that I credit with being life-changing for me.
So I actually have never read that book. I have a post of it up because one of my book club members had read it, and I need to read it, because you're saying it now. I see it everywhere. Literally every book page I am on has that book, like crediting it to like be what changed their life financially. So I
Yeah.
probably should dive into it.
Well, and it's along the lines of what you're saying. When you talk about general philosophies, you talk about meditations, it's a financial book, but it really has more to do with thinking and mindset than it actually has to do with finances. So
Okay.
yeah, I'd highly recommend it, because it's one of those where it makes you think, because there's an average thought or a way that people think when it comes to finances. And what Robert puts out is, hey, I had two people in my life, Rich Dad and Poor Dad, which, you'll have to read the book. I won't give all that away, but these two people and these two examples I had in my life. And if I would have followed this example, it would have went down this road. And had I followed this example, it would have went down this road. And it's always good to look at that dichotomy, because I think it relates so much with all of us and the choices we make on a daily basis.
Absolutely. And you know what? I'm sold. I'm adding it to my Amazon list today.
Very cool. Well, let me ask you, Brady. So you mentioned rules. I have to ask. You don't have to go through the rabbit. We don't need to go into the rabbit hole here, but what rules do you possibly have as far as when it comes to picking a book?
So it's nothing crazy. We limit it at nothing more than, I believe it's 500 pages, which is, even that's kind of a little extreme.
Yeah.
Obviously people have lives, not everybody in my group is going to be able to read as much as I read. And then we don't get into religion. Obviously I don't knock it, and nobody in our group knocks it, but in order to, I guess, not be conflicting or
Right.
confrontational. We avoid
Divisive.
anything.
Yes.
Yeah, we avoid anything religious, and that includes anything atheistic as well, anti-religious. So none of that. And then basically, yeah, everybody picks a book once a month. We try and pick a week in advance so everybody has an opportunity to purchase the book. Those first two rules, the page limits and the religious aspects, are really the only rules that kind of dictate the actual book itself.
Okay. Yeah. And those are good rules. And it can, because like you said, you don't want divisive topics. You want things that are encouraging and stretch the mind and you think about other things, but you don't want to be divisive. And you get into those
Absolutely.
large books. I haven't read a book that long, I think, since the Scottish Chiefs in high school, which was the book that William Wallace's story is based on. And it was longer than the movie, I think.
Well, and that's what I'm having a problem reading this book, The Stand. I tell you, I've been reading this book for 3 months now. It's, I think, over 1,100 pages. I mean, it's almost as big as the Bible. It's crazy.
Yeah. That's so I guess that then you have a year to read through it. You'll be good.
Yeah, exactly. And, I could have already read it, but I'm reading sometimes 4 books at a time. So,
Right. Yeah.
Wayne,
And
how much,
lately, go ahead.
I was going to ask, how often do you read?
So not as much as I'd like either. I do try to stick to, recently I've picked up the 10-page a day philosophy, but that actually came
Yeah.
from looking at the 75 hard workout program that he has put out, the big podcaster whose name escapes me as I go to mention it.
Yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about. And
Andy
I can't remember.
Frisella. And his 75 hard, I was looking at maybe jumping on that program because another podcaster who I've had on my show, Ben Killoy, did that and did an outstanding job with some weight loss and just completely rethinking some of the things he was doing. And that's what led me to the idea of looking at it. And I was like, I like this goal of 10 pages a day. So that's kind of been mine. Sometimes
Yeah.
it's more than that. Lately, I've been guilty of, talk about divisive. Lately, I've been guilty of reading a lot of political type books, but they're all specific to going into more history, like the history of socialism, the history of Marxism, the history of Maoism, just because I find those very relevant for the world we're in right now.
100%.
So that's been
Me-
my recent reading.
And there's nothing wrong with reading political. I always encourage people to read books on both sides of the spectrum to develop your own opinion. So you're not, because if you only read one side and you're going to enforce the ideologies, not to get too political on a podcast, obviously, but if you only read one side, you're going to force the ideologies that you already believe in to the point where you might not be able to see the other side of the argument if you're not getting information.
You're right. Brady, that's something that I've been lately really pushing. I've been putting it out on social media and stuff too, because we have this issue where we like to create echo chambers, and podcasts are guilty of that. I mean, that's really what these are. You have your audience that's listening to it, and there typically becomes this echo chamber. But without any differing thought, if you're only listening to one side of the news and only listening to one side of commentary and so forth, you're not going to be very balanced, and you're probably not going to have a really clear picture on what's going on, whether we're talking politics or life in general. So I encourage people to get out there and to listen to opposing arguments. Like, that shouldn't be a big deal. It shouldn't be, hey, I got to cancel them because I disagree with them. Rather, I want to hear what they have to say, so that, it doesn't mean I'm going to agree with you, but let's have the conversation.
Absolutely. And the reason I asked you how often you read is because we talked about, the beginnings of the page and the movement and why I'm doing it. But the longer I continue with this page, the more I'm realizing like the intent and the area I want to move in. And it's just like, I didn't, obviously when I started the page, I had no idea where I was going. I kind of do now. And I mean, you're on social media, obviously. How many how many first responder pages do you see that it's all dedicated to fitness? I mean, there's dozens. You see so many of them, and that's, and I made a video about this. You've probably watched it.
I did.
But it's great. It's great to have that, that fitness aspect. Obviously, a lot of first responders need it. And a lot of first responders neglect it. So having that out there is great. But at the same time, I think it's important to have a self-education or a further education outlet such as my page. You don't really see that anywhere. And that's kind of the void that I'm trying to fill. I'm trying to pursue first responders to read more because things change, every decade, tactics, techniques, the way of life, the way people think, social issues, everything changes.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for first responders who are dealing with the public, not even just police officers, firefighters, EMTs, especially paramedics and EMTs, especially. I mean, they're dealing with people daily at their worst. Um, so it's important for them to continue that mental growth, not just their physical growth. It's important to continue with their mental growth as well, to keep up with the times and to understand where we're going.
You're absolutely right. And it kind of is along those same lines of just being well-rounded and grounded in what you believe, what's going on. And you're right. I mean, even you've probably heard the term the Overton window, where you talk about how things are, what's accepted in the public, and how that Overton window kind of shifts over time. And it's true. And because society and civil society shifts over time, you have to have kind of an understanding of both the current and the past. And I'm a big believer, if you've listened to my shows for any length of time, a big believer in the past. Like, I don't think we forget the Constitution. We don't forget the founding of America. We don't forget how we got where we are. And we don't forget the bad things that happened either, because the bad things are the lessons we learn from, so we don't repeat the mistakes. But that being said, we also have to understand the current society that we're in and the humanity that we deal with on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what it comes down to, is humanity. The people we deal with, they're humans just like we are. And you see now more than anything, the divisiveness in the news. And frankly, in my opinion, that divisiveness is this, that's not really what it is. I go outside and I talk to my neighbors and I talk to everybody in my city, and there's not a single person who is, not on the same page as me and you. So
Right.
I think a lot of, especially for me, a lot of the humanity that I have comes from books. I wasn't always the most easy to get along with. I wasn't always open like I am now. I would shut people off. I was angry. I was mean, and continuing to read content that uplifts me, allows me to uplift other people around me.
Yeah. Well, let's go into that. You had mentioned bad habits and maybe a negative outlook, and how that spurred into what you're doing now. What did that look like?
Sure. So I'll start by saying, I guess, that just like anything, just like any job or any endeavor that you're pursuing, your mindset during that is what's going to dictate your happiness. So a lot of my time in the military, I like to, I wanted to blame on the people around me, or I wanted to blame on leadership, negative leadership, influencing the way that I saw the world. And especially the last couple of years I was in the military, I let a lot of things get to me. I was mean, maybe a bully to people sometimes. And I was just always angry. I just had a lot of pent up rage. I would take it out on my friends. I drank too much. It was bad all the way around. And we were talking about meditations, the Marcus Aurelius and Stoicism, kind of adopting that Stoicism philosophy and reading all these different books that kind of encompass that. I have come to the conclusion that I can't blame, and I don't, other people can blame, but they shouldn't. You shouldn't blame outside influences for how you're treating other people, or how you're treating yourself, or how angry you are at the people around you. And that's kind of what I've learned the last couple of years. I've really kind of found internal happiness and external happiness. I got to give a shout out to my fiance for that.
Yes.
But yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of any endeavor you're in, you've been in law enforcement for quite a long time. So I'm sure that you've been through hard times, and I'm sure you've been through good times, and I'm sure those hard times were hard, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely, they were. And I think a lot of what you're saying too, and a lot of it is, I think we all go through it when we're young men, because I look back, in fact, I talk about it, but I teach at the academy here. And one of the things, we're doing this thing called ART, which is Academy Resiliency Training. So we're working with these new cadets. These are a lot of times young people. Sometimes they're not. I was older when I went into law enforcement, but usually they're younger people, and we're trying to prepare them for resiliency, for being ready for the academy. And one of the stories I tell them is how me, as a young man in my early 20s, when a lot of things weren't going right, and a lot of things, maybe I wasn't making the best decisions and thinking the way I should be thinking, and just what you described, the anger that comes, you're just not a nice person. And you come to a point where it's like, I can do better. And be it books or be it, and again, there, for me, it was, again, it's more of a religious book, but at the same time I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I was given a book by of course, the author escapes me because I'm telling the story, but the book was Wild at Heart by John Eldridge. That's the name. And Wild at Heart was another one that it just kind of gave me a completely different perspective and had a lot to do with being a fundamental changing book for me over time.
Mm-hmm. And
Tell
how
me,
long have you, I'm sorry, how long have you been in law enforcement, Wayne?
so I've only been in law enforcement. I'm at the 8.5 year mark.
Okay.
So I was older when I came in. I actually had ran a landscape company, nothing to do with law enforcement prior to this. I had ran a landscape company, and then the housing crisis happened. And then I no longer ran a landscaping company, and now I'm in law enforcement.
Good. And have you read The Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement, that book?
I have, by Dr. Gil Martin. Great book, and one
Did
I
they
highly recommend.
did they make that make y'all read that in the academy out there?
So it was mentioned because some of the, usually it's local law enforcement that teaches at the academy, so they will come and mention it. However, I'm fortunate to be with an agency that finds that book very important and had made sure that many of the people that work there read it. So it's actually something that we were given directly from the agency.
Mhm. Yeah, and I relate that book. I find stoicism in that book as well, especially chapter 7. But yeah, that's definitely a book I would recommend to any cop. I'd never read it up until a couple months ago. I'd never even heard of it, honestly. I think they should make military police read that as well. And I think honestly, if I would have read that years ago, that might have helped me. I'm not gonna say that I would have been perfect, but I think people like me, that would definitely help
Yeah.
people like me in the same scenario, understanding resiliency like that.
And I think officers' families ought to read it as well,
100%.
especially immediate family members. Your wife, your girlfriend, your fiancés. I think it can make a huge difference them kind of understanding what they're going to see and the changes that are going to happen with the officer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you, for the sake of the listeners, explain Stoicism? We've mentioned it a few times, but just kind of like a base tenet of it. When you hear it, because a lot of people are like, "Yeah, I think I've heard that before. I know I've heard this person is Stoic or whatever," but they may not quite be understanding the definition of it. Can you kind of give us a little insight?
And I'm sure I'll butcher it. I don't know the exact definition off the top of my head, but essentially, stoicism is understanding your emotions and not letting your emotions get in the way of your actions. Essentially, you want to be able to control your actions, not let your emotions get the best of you, not lash out on people, not outwardly display your disgust or anger or feelings. And a lot of people will say, "Oh, well, stoicism, that just kind of sounds like you're, might as well be dead. You don't have any emotions." But that's hardly the case. I think it's kind of just it's understanding, it's on a deep level, your emotions and understanding how to handle those emotions and what you need to do, whether it be getting help, talking to people, reading a book, working out, whatever, to project those emotions somewhere else and to get them under control, so you're not always in an angry and dark place.
You're absolutely right. And, I think there's a huge difference because you're right. A lot of people have that, well, you're pretty much dead because you're not showing any emotion. There's a
Yeah.
huge difference between no emotion and having strong emotion and having the ability to control it. And what we have a lot of times right now in society, it seems like in general, is a lack of self-control. We see the worst of it in the social media world and in some of the other things that are going on. So I think that's one reason why Stoicism is resonating so much with people right now, because it's something we've kind of lost. We've lost things like discipline. We've lost things like self-control. It's one thing to be the strongest guy in the room, and that's normally the guy that doesn't have to run his mouth. It's not the barky dog. The guy that is running his mouth, as you know, being in the military, is usually the one that's going to get punched in the nose and hit the ground, and you're going to drag him out of the bar.
Absolutely. And one of my biggest takeaways probably is not letting outside influences affect, if it's out of my control, if something happens to me, oh, I have to show up 30 minutes or I have to stay after work for an extra hour or two. That's out of my control. I can't control that. I have to do it. Why be mad about it? I shouldn't be mad about things that I can't control. I should just press on, move forward, and do what I was born to do, essentially, which is work and be happy and spread a positive message,
Yeah, because another takeaway is exactly what you just said. We can't always control the things around us. In fact, normally we can't control the things around us, but we
Mhm.
can control ourselves. And if we learn that, it can be life-changing in and of itself.
Oh, absolutely. And frankly, the job I do now, um, I work for the Marshal Service as a contractor. I basically just do transport prisoners and courtroom security. So I deal with a lot of federal inmates. And I think stoicism, even in that realm, I mean, if you're in law enforcement and you're dealing with somebody who is mad at you and wants to call you names, which happens all the time. I'm sure you've
Oh
had it
yeah.
happen daily, probably. But stoicism, definitely that philosophy is gonna help you with that, because it's like, whatever, people feel the way they feel. Don't let it get to you. It's you have your feelings, they have theirs. Move on with your day. Who cares?
Yeah, I think that's good. I think it's important, and oftentimes what we're seeing it right now in the national news, what's getting officers in trouble isn't so much when, I mean, people are going to yell, they're going to do things that they shouldn't do, but
Yeah.
your reaction is everything. And if you can control that, right or wrong, I mean, I'm not excusing their behavior because they need to control themselves also, but that's a different conversation.
Yeah.
But your response to it is what's going to get you in trouble or look bad on your way of doing things and how you approach life.
Oh, 100%. I absolutely agree.
So one of the taglines that you use in your social media is this statement, and we kind of touched on a little bit earlier, was humanize first responders. What does
Mhm.
that mean to you, and why is that so important?
Well, for me now, especially we were just saying the current climate, which frankly, like I stated already, I don't think it's necessarily that way. I think it's portrayed that way, but not.
Yeah,
The silent majority is pro first responders, not just cops,
absolutely.
but it's that's kind of one of the reasons I also started the page, was to bring people together, because a lot of people read, a lot of people outside the first responder community read. And so if I can connect those people with first responders, which I do every Sunday, I do a Sunday shout out for a first responder who is, not just being a first responder, not just doing their job and going home, but people who are doing cool stuff outside of the realm of their job, connecting community, stuff like that. So I give them a shout out, and I like to post what their favorite book is, what they're reading, and why it's their favorite book. And that's, to me, is going to help bring other people who, aren't first responders. Like, oh, this guy likes that book too. It's like, hey, we made a connection. We can. They're people just like I am.
Yeah.
It's just.
And that's so important. I think that's in I love that tagline. In fact, and you also talk about bridging the gap with books, which is kind of what you touched on right there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I think those are both so important because that's a lot of why I started this. Because I think there's this tendency to say, well, they're all this or all that. So they're all cops or they're all firefighters or they're all whatever. And you don't really think about, well, no, that's a person. And that person has chosen the profession of being a cop or being. And whenever you get into this all type paintbrush, when we just paint humanity with a big all or nothing type paintbrush, you lose that. You lose the individuality, the specialness, the connection, because all that doesn't happen at the broad. Yes, they're all Americans, but Americans can define a whole lot of different people in a whole lot of different mindsets, and that's kind of the cool thing. That's the melting
Yeah.
pot that we are.
And that's the point of America. That's I
Exactly.
mean, that's literally the reason to have individuality. That's the whole concept behind our nation. So, and that's what I think is unique about it. And like you said, yeah, painting all of us one way into one picture is, it can be detrimental. So it's kind of and nobody else is going to fix that. So it is up to us
Yep.
to address that ourselves.
You're absolutely correct. And I'm glad to see you doing it. I love what you're doing. I know it's such a broad question, and you already said you couldn't answer it, but let me ask you, what would be a couple of your favorite books? We've touched on a few. We've touched on meditations, but if someone's listening to this and they're like, I haven't been reading, maybe they're 50 years old and they're like, I haven't read a book in 30 years. Maybe I ought to go out there and pick something up. What would be that something in one or two categories that you'd suggest and why?
Yeah, I think, like I said, meditations. If you haven't read Meditations, 100% read Meditations. It is a fantastic book, regardless of what career field you are in. You are going to find something positive out of it. Other than that, I mean, I believe we might have talked about this, Sovereignty by Ryan Michler. That is a fantastic book, especially for men. I mean, if you're a woman, you'll probably get something out of it, but definitely to win the hearts of men and to be a better man in general, and understand what masculinity means. That is a fantastic book.
And just like we were talking about with emotional survival, I think it's good for wives and girlfriends and fiancés to read that book as well, because as the man is reading it and coming into, what manhood, masculinity actually means, everything works better in a relationship when you're both on the same page. So I encourage wives and those whose husbands are reading that book that they also read it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it is, it is hard for me to just give a book recommendation because there's so many good ones out there. But yeah, I'd say Sovereignty, Meditations for sure. Uncivilized Man is another good one, or it might be Man Uncivilized. I might have that backwards, but it's by Traver Boehm, who actually Ryan Michler had on his podcast. So that he has a book about masculinity, which I also think resonates with women a little bit more. That's definitely a good one.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that one. I must have missed that show. I'll be sure to look that one up. So,
But it's definitely a good one. I mean, I upload every week, so if if anybody out there needs a book recommendation, honestly, for whatever area they're looking for, feel free to reach out. If you were to give me like a specific narrow angle, I'd probably be able to hone in a little bit better, but my brain just floods with dozens of books in my mind, and I don't want to just spout them all off,
Yeah, no problem. And I well answered. I like the ones that you mentioned. What book are you guys going through right now in the club?
So this month's club book, which I guess we have about 9 days or so left. It's Kill Shot. It's actually the second book in the Mitch Rapp series. The author is Vince Flynn. Anybody who's seen the movie American Assassin, it's that series.
Okay.
We read the first one 6 months ago during the last rotation, and I can't remember what next month's book is. I was going to let you know, but I did post on my story about it, but I can't remember the name of it. We just chose today.
Okay. Well, I'll be linking everything up so they'll be able to go there and look it up, which will give the audience something to do. They need to go look up what next month's book is when they make sure they like and follow and everything else. What is next, Brady? I guess you've got some other projects in the works. What are some of the other things that you're trying to do here?
Yeah, with the help of you, thankfully, giving me your insight and your guidance, which is very greatly appreciated. I am going to be starting a podcast soon, the Books Behind the Badge podcast. Basically, I'm going to have both first responders on to talk about their lives, their careers, and what books that they find interesting. And I'm also going to have authors on as well to talk about books they've wrote and books that they enjoy and what led them to being an author. So it's not going to be just one segue. It'll be both authors and first responders from all backgrounds.
That's going to be great. And usually authors, not always, but usually, here I go painting with broad brushes again. But normally they are also avid readers. So it will be interesting. I love hearing the books and stuff that authors recommend or that they've found meaningful to them, because typically you'll find that they read something in similar genres, or at least something that inspires their creativity as well.
Oh, for sure. And, that's kind of where I get a lot of the books that I read, I get from other authors because, hey, they're the subject matter experts, not me.
Yep. Nope. You're absolutely right. How, when are you hoping to launch the podcast?
I'm in the works of trying to get some dates set up to have some guests on. I do have quite a lineup. A lot of people have actually been interested, which is very surprising, in being a guest. So I'm going to start recording. Hopefully in the next 2 weeks, I'm going to start recording and go off of your advice and try and get some backed up so I'm not, lacking behind. But hopefully here in the next month or so, I'll have an episode out.
Good. Yeah. And I'm glad I could offer some suggestions of things I've learned the hard way, because that's how we all learn and that's how you can help someone else. So I'm glad.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the same with books.
Yep. You're absolutely right.
You can learn by not failing if you read the book,
Yes, that's very true. And that's good advice also. So what does the future for Brady Tucker look like? I know we got the podcast coming, but what else is on the horizon?
Yeah, I'm getting pretty close to wrapping up my degree. I'm majoring in criminal investigations. So I'm in the works of trying to get a job, but unfortunately, with the whole COVID scenario, a lot of agencies are kind of paused or moving really slow. So it
Yes.
has kind of been lagging behind, but hopefully, hopefully we'll get somewhere soon. I'm gonna keep my head up and I'm gonna stay stoic about it.
That's the right attitude. Yeah, in fact, sometimes, unfortunately, even at the academy, I mean, we're talking like teaching via Zoom, which try and teach academy classes via Zoom is horrible, but it's a necessary
Yeah,
evil.
that's wild. I have a friend actually who's he went down to FLETC 2 weeks early because they have to quarantine him in the room for 2 weeks. It's
Yeah. Yep.
unique.
Yeah, that's exactly what's going on. It is a weird world right now. 2020, as we all know, has been absolutely amazing.
Yeah. Well, and I can't as weird as 2020 has been, I got to count my blessings, man, because it's for me personally it's been pretty good. I started this page, it's kind of getting some traction. I earned my blue belt in BJJ.
Oh,
I
congratulations!
proposed to my fiance and thanks. And we're getting married in October. I'm going to graduate college this year. So it's like, as weird as this year has been, personally, it's been a good year.
Very cool. Quick rabbit trail because I was getting ready to summarize, but now I have to ask.
Sure.
Let's talk about BJJ a little bit. What got you into
Yeah.
it? You enjoying it, or?
Love it. And honestly, we could do a whole podcast about VJJ if you wanted, man. I absolutely love it. So my only regret, honestly, is not starting sooner. I started pretty much the same exact time I got out of the military. And it's honestly helped the transition because you go from having like that structured place where you have friends that you see every single day. And jujitsu is kind of the same thing. You go to class every day and you see your friends every day.
Yeah.
Um, you got it's a great outlet for working out. I'm not the big I hate running. I run, but I hate it.
Right.
I don't enjoy lifting. I do it occasionally, but jujitsu, man, I'm obsessed. I do it every single day. I kind of started doing it, but specifically for law enforcement, because I mean, as you know, if you can handle a situation without appearing violent on camera, especially with everybody's recording everything nowadays, and
Yeah.
if I can put somebody in a position that doesn't to a bystander doesn't look bad for me and for my agency, but to the suspects is very painful and I can
Yeah.
get compliance. I mean, that looks 10 times better than having to punch somebody in the face and then getting a write-up.
Exactly. Well, and even if you're justified, like you said, I mean, anytime
100%.
you can control that situation and control them, and that's one of the beautiful things about it. I agree with you. I think it should be. Unfortunately, I'm not actively involved in it. Some of our training through the agency and so forth obviously has BJJ components in it because it's
Yeah.
about leverage and it's about those kind of things, especially ground fighting because that's such a big part of it. Um, but it's something I think should be available to all law enforcement officers and military police. I think it's just that important.
And yeah, and I agree with you. And I'm very thankful, actually. The gym I train at, the owner, Ryan Jensen, he is a former UFC fighter and he is very pro law enforcement, offers discounts to law enforcement. He actually, and I can't think of it off the top of my head. I'll shoot you a link later, but he runs a program out of the gym for the local law enforcement agencies. So they sign up and they do week-long courses with them it's like a department essentially, kind of like the Gracie has their
Yeah.
law enforcement
I
school.
know they're huge down here in the Florida
Yeah.
area. I see their videos all the time.
Yeah. So it's kind of essentially the same concept. So I am glad that I am at such a pro law enforcement gym. But that's the thing too. It's such a melting pot. We were talking about melting pots in America. You go to a gym, and we were also talking about support and the media and how they're portraying things. I go to the gym, I'm training with cops, I'm training with former drug addicts, I'm training with people who have felony convictions, I'm training with people from liberals, Democrats, every walk of life.
Right.
When you step on that mat, none of that matters. We're all people, we're all friends, we're all here to learn, and we're all here to help each other out. And it's been so beneficial for me in seeing the spectrum of every type of human and just realizing, again, humanizing humans.
Exactly. And I think that is so powerful. And I think whether we're talking BJJ or there's so many, that's why people need to be active in things like that, because what you just described is America. You know, you
Yeah.
have liberals, you have conservatives, you have people that don't know what they are. You have all this collection of people, but they're people. And when they step there, what matters is BJJ, because you're here to, you're going to roll and you're going to do your thing, and you're going to try not to cry like a baby if you're me. And, you know, you're going to, that's just the way it's going to go, but that's America.
Yeah, it's something that I would honestly recommend to everybody, and I hope maybe I've inspired you to drop into a gym and get some rolls in.
I need to. It's on the list. There's a few things on the list that, as you will find as you get rolling on this podcast, time is can be an enemy if you're working full time.
Oh yeah, I'd imagine. And that's
But
kind of where I'm at right now. Is I'm kind of blessed to, you know, I am going to school, but I really do only work part time, so I do have a lot of time on my hands.
good. Yeah, you're in a good spot, and I'm excited to see where it's going to lead for you. You keep mentioning this whole thing with the portrayal of media, and I just want to piggyback on that real quick, that you are absolutely right. In my anecdotal experience, we see what's going on via social media and via what the media portrays. But anecdotally here in this area and the people I've had contact with, I mean, they support law enforcement. They are just
Yeah.
good people. And they all have a good mindset and the same conversational tone that you and I are having.
Yeah, definitely 100%. And I really think that I mean, like you said, it's the same thing everywhere. I mean, it doesn't matter where you go. It's 99% of people aren't affected, you know, by the negativity that is being portrayed, and people just are going to continue with their lives. They're not going to, you know, unless you're in Portland, I mean, you're pretty much fine. So
Exactly. And you know what that means? That means as a country we have hope, and
yeah,
that's the bottom line.
yeah, 100%, definitely.
Well, let me ask you, Brady, and question in closing, I kind of ask everybody, what's
Sure.
one takeaway, one thing that we all can do, and law enforcement officers, but it can be broader than that, one thing we can do that's going to make a difference in our personal lives?
Well, I think you might know my answer to this one. That's read more books. It's kind of my whole mission, and it's changed my life. It's changed some of the people's lives around me, and I think that it could change a lot of people's lives if they just read more. And because it's not just the reading, it translates to everything. It's kind of an accountability thing. A consistency, really. If you're consistent enough to do that, you're going to be consistent enough to work out, or consistent enough to do your homework, or whatever it is that you need to do.
Yep. That's so true, and such great advice, and something that I find is so true for me. I say that all the time with working out and so forth too, that if I don't remain consistent there, everything else is going to suffer, because it's something that changes you when you do something consistently that helps improve your state and where you are in life.
Oh yeah, and you know your mental health and your physical health, it's directly correlated. So if you're healthy mentally, you know it's gonna push you to be healthy physically as well.
Absolutely. How can people connect with you?
Well, you can find me at Instagram. It's the Books Behind the Badge, and hopefully soon enough you'll find me on Spotify, iTunes, and whatever other platform you listen to podcasts on. I kind of am on Facebook, not really. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm trying to branch out, but like you said, it's a very time and takes a lot of time to do that. But you can find me at Books Behind the Badge.
Very good. I'll be sure to link all those up for our listeners. And I'm excited, Brady. I think it's going to be exciting to see what you launch here and what happens with this podcast. And what you're doing is really good stuff. And I think it's going to make a really positive difference for a lot of people. So I really appreciate your time, and I appreciate you coming on today. And maybe a year down the road or so, I'd love to have you on again and see where you're at with this.
Yeah, that would be great. And I really appreciate you having me on, and I appreciate all the guidance and wisdom that you've gave me.
You're
Thanks.
absolutely welcome. Thank you so much for coming on, Brady.
Thanks.